What if my neighbor is a witch? With that thought in the back of their minds, in 1692, the people of a small town called Salem, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in New England, on the northeastern edge of what we now call the United States, sent 25 people to their deaths. There wasn't a single solid piece of modern rational evidence, only the screams of a few girls, stories about the devil, and a court that believed in visions. 19 people were hanged. One elderly man was slowly crushed to death with stones. Several more died in prison. Centuries later, the authorities would officially admit this was not a fight against witches. It was a gigantic miscarriage of justice. So what really happened in Salem? And how did fear of witchcraft turn an ordinary town into a killing machine? Imagine a small town at the edge of the known world. Wooden houses, harsh winters, constant fear of hunger, raids, and the wrath of God. It's the late 17th century. The New England region, the English colony of Massachusetts Bay. What we now call the United States doesn't exist yet. On the map, you see a thin line of European settlements surrounded by vast lands inhabited by native peoples. Salem at the end of the 1600s is nothing like the tourist town with souvenir shops and cartoon witches on every mug. Back then, it's a small Puritan settlement. People there truly believe they are God's chosen community, meant to live strictly, honestly, and in fear of sin. Any misfortune, illness, a bad harvest, a fire, is seen as a sign. Someone has sinned, the devil is at work. God is angry. Life is hard and tense. Around the town lie forests where hostile tribes might appear. Bloody conflicts with native peoples are in recent memory. The political situation in the colony is unstable as well. Charters change, rulers change, legal norms change. People are unsure about tomorrow, and even unsure who really has the right to judge them. Add to that the long-standing conflicts between families. Who owns which piece of land, who owes whom money, who offended whom at church, who got their debt repaid, and who didn't. It's a world where fear and suspicion run deep in people's minds. All it needs is a single spark, and everything bursts into flame. The spark is lit in the home of the local pastor, Samuel Parris. In early 1692, his 9-year-old daughter Betty and his 12-year-old niece Abigail Williams begin to behave strangely. The girls scream, twist in convulsions, complain that someone is stabbing them with invisible needles, biting them, choking them. Sometimes they fall to the floor and seem to lose control of their own bodies. To us today, that could look like a neurological condition, hysteria, panic attacks, or a mass psychogenic response. But for people of that time, raised in constant fear of the devil, it looks very different. If the doctor can't find a normal illness, then it must be witchcraft. The pastor calls in a doctor. He examines the girls, finds nothing that makes sense to him, and says the sentence that will change the fate of an entire town. This is most likely the influence of an unclean spirit. From that moment on, the illness stops being just an illness. It becomes proof that the devil is at work somewhere nearby, acting through witches. The girls are questioned. Who is doing this to you? Who is sending you this torment? The psychological pressure grows. Adults are in practice feeding them the right answers. Which women come close to you? Who looks at you strangely? Who do you feel uneasy around? Eventually, the first names appear. The first is Tituba, an enslaved woman from distant lands. Different, not like the white Puritans. Rumors say she tells the children stories about spirits and magic. The second is Sarah Good, a poor woman who often begs for food, goes from house to house, speaks her mind, and doesn't bow and scrape. In a strict Puritan community, that alone is enough to make many see her as a problem. The third is Sarah Osborne, a woman with a bad reputation who has quarreled with the church and broken local social rules. 3 convenient targets. They're poor, on the margins, and have no serious protection. It's easy to point a finger at them and say, that's who's to blame. The women are arrested. The anxious little settlement is on edge. The very thing they've always feared has begun. An official investigation into witchcraft. Before we go further, let's take a look at who is actually involved in this story. On one side are the afflicted girls and other accusers. It's not just Betty and Abigail. Over time, other teenagers and young women join them, and they start showing similar symptoms: convulsions, screams, stories about invisible spirits tormenting them. On the other side are the accused. At first, they are marginal figures: the enslaved Tituba, poor Sarah Good, unremarkable Sarah Osborne. Later, accusations strike respected people: devout Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, and many others. In total, over 200 people will be accused during the Salem trials. There is also the clergy. Local pastor Samuel Parris, who first takes the idea of witchcraft seriously. Influential ministers like Cotton Mather and his father Increase Mather, who try to interpret what's happening in religious terms, argue about whether mystical experiences can count as evidence, and eventually begin to see the scale of the disaster. Then there is the colonial government, officials and judges. Judge John Hathorne, known for his harshness, Judge William Stoughton, one of the central figures of the court, and of course the governor of the colony, William Phipps, who will eventually feel the political and public pressure and be forced to intervene. And finally, there is the community as a whole. Neighbors, relatives, people who have lived side by side for years but have built up grudges. They argue over land and inheritances, over church leadership and influence. For some, what's happening is a chance to purify the town. For others, it's a quiet opportunity to eliminate people they already disliked. All these lines intersect in one place: the courtroom. Let's return to the first trio of accused women. The interrogations are harsh. The most frightening story happens to Tituba. Her owner pressures her, the authorities pressure her, the pastor pressures her. It is made very clear: if she doesn't confess, things will go very badly. Tituba chooses the path that seems to her like the only way to have at least a small chance of surviving. She confesses. But she does more than simply say, "Yes, I'm a witch." Under pressure, in a mixture of fear, imagination, and leading questions, she performs an entire dramatic narrative. She says she has seen the devil, black dogs and pigs, heard voices, seen a book in which witches sign their names. And most importantly, she claims there are many witches, that this is a conspiracy, and that other names are written in that book. For the Puritans, this sounds like confirmation of their worst fears. For the authorities, it justifies what they are about to do. If there is a plot, they must act harshly. For anyone who wants to settle old scores, it's an open door. Now any inconvenient person can be pushed into the category of witch. From this moment on, accusations begin to multiply. Other afflicted people join the original girls. Some may be experiencing real symptoms of stress and trauma. Others copy the behavior under the influence of those around them. But to the community, it all looks the same. Children supposedly tormented by an invisible force, calling out new names. The names of witches spread through the town like wildfire. And over time, something important changes. Accusations start hitting not only marginal figures but also quite respectable people. For example, Rebecca Nurse, an elderly, deeply religious woman known for her piety. For many townspeople, this is a shock. How can a woman like that be a witch? But the mechanism is already in motion. If even Rebecca can be a witch, then truly anyone can. Family conflicts. inheritance disputes, quarrels over land, all of this quietly weaves itself into the chain of accusations. Have you been fighting with a neighbor over a field for years? Now there is a chance to settle it once and for all, if the right name just happens to come up in court. To handle the growing avalanche of cases, the colonial authorities create a special court with a beautiful but ominous name, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, from French, to hear and determine. Judges arrive in Salem to hear evidence and hand down verdicts, and this is where the story becomes especially terrifying. What counted as evidence in that court is, from today's perspective, almost impossible to call anything but a legal nightmare. The main weapon of the prosecution is so-called spectral evidence. This means that in court a person can say something like, "I saw the spirit or specter of the accused. It tormented me, bit me, choked me, came to me at night." And the judges agree to treat this as real proof that the accused is in league with the devil. Picture the courtroom. The accused woman stands before the judges. A group of girl accusers suddenly begin to writhe, scream, and claim they see her specter, that she is strangling them right now with invisible hands. People in the room are crying, praying. The judges' faces grow darker. In that atmosphere, does the accused have any chance at all? There is virtually no real legal defense. The logic is simple and insane at the same time. If you confess, that proves you are a witch, but maybe, just maybe, your life will be spared. If you refuse to confess, that means the devil is holding your tongue, so you are clearly guilty, and you must be hanged. The first person to be executed is Bridget Bishop. She has a reputation as a too-free woman. She wears brighter clothing than is considered proper, has been married several times, and owns a tavern where alcohol is served. Against the background of Puritan severity, that is more than enough for many to have looked at her with suspicion for years. Now their resentment finally has an official channel. After Bridget, the executions follow one after another. Rebecca Nurse is led to the gallows, Martha Corey is led to the gallows, and many others as well. People who sat with them in the same church only months before now stand on the hill and watch them hang. Some sincerely believe that this is how the town is being cleansed of evil. Some are terrified of becoming the next target and choose to stay silent. Some, perhaps even then, already understand that things have gone too far, but are too scared to try to turn back. And all this time, the afflicted girls keep playing their part, probably no longer able to tell where their real suffering ends and where the learned behavior begins, the pattern that brings them attention and power. The most horrifying episode in this story is connected to an elderly farmer named Giles Corey. At the time he is already over 80, he too is accused of witchcraft. But Giles, stubborn and perhaps simply very tired of life, refuses to tell the court what it wants to hear. He does not say, "I am innocent." He does not say, "I am guilty." He simply refuses to enter a plea and, in effect, to recognize the court. This creates a problem for the judges. Under the law of the time, in order to put someone properly on trial, the accused has to enter a plea, guilty or not guilty. Without that, the process technically cannot even begin. But the authorities are not willing to let Corey go. So they resort to an old, brutal procedure, peine forte dure, strong and hard punishment. They lay Giles on the ground and place a wooden board on his chest. Then, one by one, they start piling heavy stones on top of the board. Time passes. His breathing grows more difficult. His body aches under the crushing weight. They offer him a deal. Confess, and we'll stop. But he stays silent. According to legend, the only words he says to his executioners are, "More weight." After several days, he dies under the weight of the stones. but formally he has never spoken a single word, neither confession nor declaration of innocence. The cruel paradox is that his silence essentially saves his property. Since he was never officially convicted, the authorities cannot confiscate his land. It stays with his family. In a town where terrified people are forcing confessions out of one another, one old man chooses to die rather than give the system a single word. In total, more than 200 people are accused during the Salem trials. Dozens end up in prison. 19 are hanged. One elderly man is pressed to death with stones. Several others die in jail from illness and the conditions of their confinement. Even in a society wound this tight with fear, there is a limit. At some point, the wave of accusations starts to crash not only over the poor and the inconvenient, but over people at the very top of the community. Rumors appear, and then direct accusations against those who just yesterday were considered the pillars of the town. At one point, even the wife of the colonial governor comes under suspicion. At the same time, some of the clergy begin to voice doubts. One influential minister says openly, "It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent person be condemned." For late 17th century Puritans, that sounds almost revolutionary. Under pressure from public unease and political concerns, the colonial governor decides to act. He dissolves the court of Oyez and Terminer. A new court is created, one that no longer accepts spectral evidence as sufficient grounds for a death sentence. Many of the accused, who only recently were destined for the gallows, are gradually released. The executions stop, but the dead do not come back. A strange kind of hangover sets in. People wake up, as if from a heavy, feverish dream, and begin to realize what they have done. Some of the judges who made these decisions publicly repent and admit they were wrong. A few years later, the authorities of Massachusetts proclaimed days of fasting and prayer as an act of repentance for these errors of justice. Little by little, compensation is paid to the victims' families, though it rarely covers either the moral or material damage. In the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, laws are revised, some verdicts are officially overturned, and a number of names are cleared. And perhaps the most striking thing is this: the process of official rehabilitation essentially stretches out over centuries. Only in very recent times were the charges finally lifted from the last of the convicted whose name had still remained formally stained. The town and the state seem to have spent centuries working up the courage to say out loud what was obvious. This was a monstrous mistake. Today, historians no longer look at the Salem witch trials as a battle against witches, but as a complex knot of religion, politics, psychology, and social conflict. There are several major lines of explanation. First, the religious and social context. A Puritan society obsessed with sin, the devil, and strict hierarchy is, by itself, ideal ground for mass hysteria. If you grow up believing there is an invisible war between God and Satan all around you, then any strange symptom, a child's convulsions, the sudden death of livestock, can easily be explained as the work of evil spirits. Second, the psychological. Many scholars talk about mass psychogenic illness. In a world where children and teenagers are forbidden to express emotions openly, the body can start speaking for them through fits, fainting spells, seizures. Add imitation. When one child receives attention, power, and a special status because of their symptoms, others may unconsciously begin to copy that behavior. Third, medical hypotheses. In the 20th century, some researchers suggested that part of the symptoms might be due to ergot poisoning, a fungus that can infect rye and cause hallucinations and convulsions. Today, many historians treat this theory cautiously. It doesn't explain everything and ignores key social factors. But the very existence of such hypotheses shows how multi-layered this story is. Biology, psychology, culture, and power are all tightly intertwined. Fourth, the political and legal perspective. Salem has become a classic example of what happens when courts stop relying on evidence and turn into instruments of fear. It is no accident that the phrase witch hunt has been used many times since, far beyond religion, to describe political purges, ideological campaigns, and media lynchings where people are destroyed on the basis of accusations and rumors rather than proven facts. Fifth, the cultural dimension. Modern Salem has turned in some ways into a brand. Witch-themed shops, tours, museums. There is a strange double edge here. On one hand, the town earns money from a dark piece of history. On the other, the monuments and museums still remind visitors that behind all this stand real people, real deaths, and real pain. The story of the Salem witch trials is often told as a horror story about sorcerers and ghosts. But once you strip away the mystical decoration, you see something very different. It is not a story about how dangerous witches are. It is a story about how dangerous fear, fanaticism, and gossip become once they receive the backing of the law. Fear of the unknown, of disease, war, poverty, is always searching for simple explanations. It is easier to believe that the witch next door is to blame than to accept that the world is more complex and chaotic than we want it to be. It is easier to look at a poor woman, a foreign servant, or an inconvenient neighbor and decide they are the ones who brought evil into this town. The justice system, created to protect people, in Salem turned into a tool that cemented and legalized this fear. Children whose screams and convulsions should have been the start of medical and psychological investigation became the key witnesses for the prosecution. The court that was meant to search for truth became a machine responding not to facts, but to hysteria and visions. In the end, Salem did not go down in history as a town that defeated evil. It became a small corner of the world where one thing is painfully clear. When a society lets fear and fanaticism run its courts, the gallows and the crushing stone sooner or later are used not on monsters, but on entirely ordinary people. And perhaps the most important lesson of Salem is not just, "This must never happen again," but that the same mechanisms can return at any time, in any era, under any slogans, if we stop asking uncomfortable questions, demanding evidence, and defending every person's right to a fair trial. Salem was a small town, but its story still reminds us that the unknown forces we're afraid of don't really live in the forest or the night sky. They live inside our own minds, as fear, prejudice, and a willingness to believe the very worst. And far more often than any witches, it is those forces that kill people. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It truly helps this channel grow and allows me to create more documentaries like this for you.